Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is Alex Boris. I'm a recent graduate of the School of Industrial and Labor Relations. On campus, I served as the student-elected trustee and, more importantly, was a member of the great Cornell Forensic Society, where I had the honor of losing to many of the people on the stage right now quite often. The Cornell Forensic Society is the speech and debate team of Cornell. We send students to competitions throughout the United States and throughout the world. And it's my privilege to introduce Sam Nelson, who is a senior lecturer in the School of Industrial and Labor Relations and the director of the Cornell Forensic Society. When Sam came to Cornell just a few years ago, I think there was something around the order of 5 members on the debate team. And he's helped to grow it to an organization that's over 100 students and is now the #1 ranked debate program in the world. So please help me in welcoming Sam Nelson.
Alex is quite modest about his ability to debate. Last year he won the Yale tournament, which was the largest collegiate debate tournament in the United States, and was a big reason why we were ranked #1. It's quite an accomplishment. It's certainly been one of the most proud things in my 25-year teaching career to be associated with the speech and debate program here at Cornell. I just wanted to list some of the other programs that did pretty well last year. 10th in the world was the University of Sydney from Australia. 9th was the University College London. 8th was Oxford. 7th was Monash from Australia. 6th was Cambridge. 5th was Yale. 4th was McGill. 3rd was Harvard. 2nd was the University College Dublin. And of course, 1st was Cornell. So I'm personally very proud of it, and so are the students here at Cornell. We all should be. Today's debate is about whether or not Cornell should embrace massive open online courses, MOOCs, and what I'd like to quickly do is introduce the debaters, and then the debate will be on. During the debate, what will happen is each person will speak for about 5 minutes. There'll be a period of time where Alex, who's going to be our timekeeper, when the 1 minute's over, he'll clap his hands. And then that will mean that members of the other team can stand up and ask to be recognized to ask a question. But the speaker doesn't have to take the question. They can say, no, thank you, please sit down, and continue with their debating. They usually will take 1 or 2 questions during the course of their 5-minute speech, trying to make themselves look good and hopefully not get that knockout punch of the stunning question they weren't ready for. So it'll be quite exciting. Feel free to participate by banging on your table if someone says something really good and you really want to support it. This format of debate is originated in England in the House of Commons, and this is like a big thing that they like to do. Please try to refrain from booing if someone says something outrageous, and at all costs, do not throw anything up here on the stage. Okay. So just for some quick introductions. On the pro side, that Cornell University should embrace these massive open online courses will be Julius Carey. Julius he's a junior in the College of Arts and Sciences, majoring in government, and he comes from Eatontown, New Jersey. He's the captain of the world's debate team right now, and he recently won the University of Rochester tournament about a month ago. Also on the pro side is Srinath Reddy. Srinath hails from Singapore. He's a senior in economics, government, and math, and he is a lover of Scrabble. He wanted me to tell everybody. Next year, he has already landed a job for next year as an economic analyst at a company called Cornerstone Research based in New York City. It's actually where Alex also works this year. So we have a nice little pipeline going there from the Cornell Forensic Society to that company. Oh, and by the way, Srinath is also a vice president of the Cornell Forensic Society. On the con side, saying that we shouldn't embrace massive open online courses, will be Michelle Wang. Michelle is a senior in the School of Industrial Labor Relations, and she hails from Brooklyn, New York. Last year, she made it to the finals of the elimination rounds of the CETA National Debate Tournament. It's another format of debate. She's multi-talented. She's good in all kinds of formats of debate, and it's a pleasure to have her here today. She's working on a thesis for the School of Industrial Labor Relations on the New York City garment district in modern times and when it continues to help it thrive in present-day conditions. So if you're interested in talking afterwards with Michelle about the New York City garment district, she knows a lot about it. And then the last speaker in today's debate will be Kirat Singh. And Kirat is a senior in Arts and Sciences, Economics and Government. He hails from New Delhi, India. He's the president of the Cornell Forensic Society. And last week, he was entered in a debate tournament at the University of Toronto, and he was selected the 5th best speaker at the North American Championships. So he's had a lot of success as well. So we're looking forward to this debate. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce the Prime Minister in today's debate. Please come forward. Julius.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming, and thanks, Sam, for that very nice introduction of all of us. Probably better introduction than I deserve. Anyway, the topic today deals with something that I think is central to Cornell's future. The question of MOOCs, massive open online courses, and whether or not Cornell will embrace a new format of spreading knowledge across this university and across this country. I'll have 3 points for today. The first is about how MOOCs are essential technological change for Cornell University to embrace. Second, from a moral standpoint, why Cornell should have an obligation to use its resources and to embrace MOOCs as a means of spreading knowledge across other universities. And finally, financial. The potential for MOOCs to be able to get returns on Cornell's investments, which could then, in turn, be reinvested in other things that Cornell wants to do. So first, technological. It's our fundamental assertion on this side of the house that the educational world is changing. We think that the dominance of brick-and-mortar institutions won't be able to last much longer because there's a new format in which people can actually access information without having to go to a classroom, actually having to sort of engage in the traditional way of getting knowledge. The question in this debate is how we respond to that change. On this side of the house, we say that we have to embrace this new future. We think the new world is flexible in that people want to be able to do things on their own schedules and want to pack in as many things in the day as possible, and also is online. Because as we all know, the internet is now a depository of a large amount of information. So again, the question is whether or not we want to go where the information is, whether or not Cornell should sort of embrace the new online format as a way of transferring knowledge to our students. Then that ultimately our reputation as a university is at stake. We want Cornell to be an institution that is at the cutting edge of these new technological developments. Institutions like MIT and Harvard are already taking the first step by investing $60 million in edX, the first major massive online open course platform. We think that if we fail to take on MOOCs now, we will ultimately be left behind. All of us know that the pace of technological change is very rapid, and very often the person who gets there first ends up getting the most advantage in the end. My next argument is moral. Within that, Cornell is unique in as a depository of knowledge. Our libraries are some of the largest in the world, and our faculty is some of the best known. Within that, Cornell here has the opportunity to reach a larger audience, and we think we ought to embrace the role for Cornell University as an educator of the larger community. What MOOCs allow us to do is to tell people all around the world that they don't have to actually be at Cornell University to sit in the lecture halls to actually get what our professors have to offer. Rather, I'll take you in 1 second, Michelle, we'll be willing to put this information online, we'll be able to access it from all across the world. Yes?
When Justice X, the famous philosophy course offered at Harvard University, was spread to San Jose University, this essentially resulted in the gutting of the philosophy department there. How is this a good moral thing to do for professors at other universities?
We don't think it's necessary that you've got other departments. We think that when you're able to have Cornell team up with large business institutions to be able to offer a massive open online course, and there were other universities offered to pay us for that course, you end up with a circumstance in which you have more money to reinvest in other departments. We simply fundamentally reject the idea that education is a zero-sum game, that by putting money in the electronic means, you therefore take away money from the brick-and-mortar institutions, the more traditional way in which Cornell has shared knowledge with its students. So again, back to the moral point, we think that ultimately we want to create an ethic of information sharing between universities. I don't think we want a circumstance in which we see each other as sort of separate. We see our faculty as only serving our own students. We think rather we want to embrace a situation in which faculty don't have to be stuck to their own university, but rather can teach members of other universities as well. The final argument is financial. We think that initial investments in MOOCs present great opportunities for return by selling MOOCs to other universities. We think that those returns can actually be reinvested. What does that actually lead to? We think it leads to one thing, to more research, especially in a world in which funding is limited. We think that these returns benefit our school by sort of maintaining our role as a world-leading research institution, because eventually Cornell has to find out what to do with this particular money, and we think very often you have a situation in which you have research-starved budgets and where faculty could really use this money to actually serve Cornell's purpose as a research institution. And we think also you end up benefiting other universities, because when you have additional money coming in from MOOCs, coming in from the ability again to sell this our classes to other universities, you're able to sort of produce knowledge which is then used by other universities, which ends up benefiting your reputation, because other universities will want to cite your work when they're performing research. So at the end of the day, I think there are three reasons why you should embrace it. First, because from a technological standpoint, Cornell simply must be on the cutting edge of a new development, simply must be the place where information is today, which is online, and the nature of information is also more global now. Second, I think there's a moral point, that Cornell needs to use its knowledge to benefit the broader community and create sort of an idea that we should all share information between universities rather than seeing our faculty as only serving our own students. And finally, financial. We think that the financial gains from MOOCs can actually go back to serving professors, from serving the traditional means by which we educate our students. Thanks very much.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here. Kira and I believe that Cornell is a brand. Cornell is a brand associated with innovation, associated with increasing access, associating with decreasing inequality, and none of these things comport with massive open online courses. None of these things are things that are proven in the studies, in the examples that we've seen at San Jose University or at Harvard. None of these things are things that necessarily lead to an improvement of our brand. We believe that entering into the MOOC market necessarily means that we threaten the integrity associated with our university. Julius makes several arguments. The first argument he makes is that this is key to technology. He paints a false portrait of how MOOCs will be used. He says that this will increase flexibility, it'll enable students to study on their downtime, but this is not what's going to happen. What's more likely to happen is that universities like San Jose University will gut their departments in order to save money, will take courses from prestigious universities like Cornell instead of offering physical courses. We believe that this is not a matter of flexibility, it's a matter of changing the way our universities work. It's a matter of creating a further distinction between universities at the top, like Cornell and Harvard and Yale, and universities that might not be able to compete at that same level. We believe that this is inherently harmful. There's no argument for why we necessarily must engage with technology if it necessarily leads to inequality. The second argument that he makes is that we have a moral obligation to provide high-quality teaching to all. I think that what he doesn't realize is that we also have a moral obligation to preserve educational discourse. We have a moral obligation to make sure that academia survives, not only in bastions of tradition like Cornell, but in places like San Jose University. We have a moral obligation to make sure that professors are employed at other universities, and while they might not be as brilliant as professors at Cornell, they're important because heterogeneity in academia is key to drive public discourse, and this is absolutely necessary to create some of these innovations that Cornell is necessary for. Because as brilliant as we are, we cannot do it alone, and we believe that other universities and faculty there play a key role in doing this. The third argument that he makes is that MOOC is a great opportunity to make money and that it's key to helping research. This argument is very silly because it's a red herring, right? We cannot possibly make enough money from MOOCs to displace the massive amounts of funding that we receive from the NSF or the NIH. If not having enough grant funding is the issue, then MOOCs are not the answer because it's very unclear that they'll provide enough financial support. The second argument is that quality is also key here, right? Cornell can do many things to make a lot of money. David Skorton could be on a reality show that I'm sure would be very interesting. We could have a survivor-based fight for professors that will be broadcasted on TV as they hope to get tenure. None of these things are things that Cornell would do, but these are things that would probably make a lot more money than MOOCs would. It's not a unique reason for why we should embrace MOOCs. Now, I'd like to make 4 points of argument today. First, that this necessarily leads to a race to the bottom in educational quality. Second, that professors are more than teachers and we should make every effort to preserve them at every university. Third, that there are disproportional effects associated with MOOCs and certain disciplines will be hurt more. And fourth, increasing educational inequality is inconsistent with Cornell's goals. My first point is that it will necessarily lead to a race to the bottom educational quality at Cornell. There is a significant attrition rate associated with MOOCs. Only 6.8 to 10% of people actually complete these courses, which means that there's probably, this raises a red flag, right? There's something very different about having a professor there. There's something very different about being able to interact with an audience of students. These are things that increase investment in education, increase interest, and these are things that necessarily lead to better outcomes. When you're in your room, when you're not talking to anybody, when you don't have a professor as a role model, this is problematic because you won't be as invested as a student. Yes, ready? Okay. The second point is that professors are more than teachers. They're role models, they're counselors, they're people who can provide us key advice because of all of the experience that they have. My relationship with my thesis advisor is very tight, for example, because he teaches me about things that I don't know. And I think that these are intangibles that are lost when we replace a professor with a screen. These are intangibles that can't be accessed by alternatives like counselors because they simply don't have the experience in these high fields. And these are intangibles that will necessarily lead to worse educational outcomes. My third point is that there are disproportional effects associated with MOOCs. Universities have the incentive to gut departments that lead to less immediate profit. So departments like the humanities would necessarily be more poorly affected. And we think that this is harmful, right? Because there's already a move towards privileging certain departments in universities, and we think that having rich discourse and rich education means incorporating all departments. My fourth point is that it leads to educational inequality, which is incompatible with Cornell's goals. It leads to inequality among professors, where superstar professors will have MOOCs and other professors won't. And this will lead to decrease in faculty cooperation and increase among the faculty. We recognize this already happens, but MOOCs will institutionalize it, which we think is harmful. The second point is that it leads to inequality among people. Places like Cornell and Yale and Harvard will always be taught by people, but the masses will be taught by screens. And while debaters might love to interact with robots, we think that it's probably a bad thing that we create this distinction. And we think that it's probably a bad thing that people don't have access to the resources that we have at Cornell. MOOCs can't solve this. It's probably going to lead to worse outcomes.
Ladies and gentlemen, my life is immeasurably improved by the fact that I've physically come to Cornell University and physically interacted with professors. But I also realize how special I've been in that respect and how millions of people out there in the world have not had the same privilege. The unfortunate fact that the opposition in this debate is going to have to deal with is that there are millions of people who want to have educations like the one many of us in this room have benefited from and are benefiting from, but that are unfortunately locked out from having the same kind of educational access. Michelle is absolutely right. Cornell is a brand. It is vested in quality and innovation. But unlike her, we believe that what MOOCs will do is to allow Cornell to become a brand that is accessible to many more people's lives. I will make 2 points. The first is, If this is really a debate where we're trading off the harm that accrues to academics, such as those at San Jose State who lost their jobs, and the people who have massively gained as a consequence of being able to see Michael Sandel on a video screen, we think that the latter are far more important. The second is that the university has tons of other aims which could benefit from having money. This could be things like research grants or debate teams that have to travel around the country and around the world. We think that the money that can be generated by MOOCs, which Michelle has underplayed, could be very helpful there. So first, recognize that the race to the bottom that side fears is already on. This is called the market in higher education. The unfortunate fact is that if San Jose State University's philosophy department could not outcompete a videotaped lecture by Michael Sandel, we might want to have second thoughts about the philosophy department at San Jose State. We might want to have second thoughts about their capacity, sit down, to be role models. We might want to have second thoughts as to whether the immense number of PhDs that are being granted around this country are PhDs with comparable quality to Cornell professors who, even through videotapes, are able to deliver the most important fundamentals of education with clarity and concision. This is the real Cornell advantage. The fact that our professors shape not only our minds but their disciplines as well. The fact that they do both of these at the same time makes them better at doing both of those things. It makes them better at being the kind of role models that side of the house wants. The fallacious thing that you're going to hear from Kirat as well is that simply by virtue of being a member of the professoriate, that you are automatically a role model, regardless of the kind of training you have, regardless of the complete apathy with which you treat students, instead of the opportunity that MOOCs uniquely represent. MOOCs are not the nightmare scenario that side wants you to believe they are. In fact, companies like Udacity reject 98% of the professors who apply to teach a MOOC as part of them. This is because those companies, much like universities like Cornell, care a great amount about the fact that MOOCs, because of their inherent uniqueness and disadvantage of having to sit behind a screen, have to be additionally more concerned with the kind of quality that they're able to deliver. Of course, it's true, I'll take you in a second, Michelle, that there is a disproportionate impact across disciplines, in which case we are encouraged by the fact that MOOCs have a distinctly practicalist tint, which is why 27% of MOOCs that are taught in disciplines like the computer sciences, which have clearly a far more practicalist tint than humanities departments. Yes, Michelle.
You say that, sorry. Okay, whatever. If access to the Cornell brand is important, is there or is there not going to be a distinction between people who receive a Cornell diploma and people who just watch Cornell professors on video?
I contend to you that distinction exists in a world where we sit at Cornell University and are gaining that education, and those people who would potentially benefit from MOOCs are not gaining an education at all. That disparity exists. It's a disparity that will be corrected on neither side of the bench today. What we do is to narrow that disparity by giving these people at least some semblance of Cornell education by proxy and by videotape, which we think is better than the dire educational circumstances that they face. One last point. The university has tons of things that it could use money for. Research grants. We recognize that it, for instance, might not always be able to fund the massive research grants, such as those of the NIH. But small research grants can change lives too. Small amounts of money that can send me to debate tournaments across the world have changed my life immeasurably. At the end of the day, what Julius and I stand against is an ivory tower that just remains an ivory tower. As an Ivy League university, Cornell stands risk in this age of change and innovation of becoming overgrown with old weeds. MOOCs may be a failed experiment, but they are a costless experiment, and they may offer us a way out. And Julius and I stand for embracing them for exactly that regard.
For the final speech of today's debate, Kirat Singh.
Thank you, Sam, and thank you to everyone for showing up. It's an absolute honor to be here. I'm going to bring you two arguments. I'm going to first tell you why exactly it is that the quality of education at Cornell will be hampered to an irreparable extent, and then I'm going to talk to you a little bit about this finance bogey, right? Because we completely reject the premise that MOOCs are going to be the pill that government thinks they are. Let's first quickly rebut one argument that we heard from the last speaker. He claims that millions of people are currently locked out of this lovely Cornell education inclusion, and therefore MOOCs are going to solve that access problem. That even if they get just sort of a Cornell diploma light, it's going to be better than not being able to attend Cornell at all. We reject the framing of the problem as government would like you to believe it. We don't think that we're stuck in a world where the only solution to mitigating educational inequity is putting videos online. We think other solutions exist. We think the government could start spending more money on education and less on fighter planes. That might be a nice start, for instance. We reject the way that this problem has been in a very constrained way given to us. No, thank you. So let's talk about the quality of education. We think that they diminish the importance of what it means to interact with other individuals when you study with them. Peer-to-peer interactions are critical in engaging in any kind of learning in many disciplines. This could also be due to non-academic factors. Some of the most valuable education I found at Cornell is the kind of education I got when I talked to people, other students, who came from different backgrounds than I did, who came from other countries, who spoke other languages, who believed in different gods and ate different foods. I learned how to live with them. I learned how to appreciate the way they lived. We think all of these benefits are entirely lost when we live in a world that's peopled by MOOCs. No, thank you. We also think that interactions with professors are incredibly important. Sure, not all professors are incredibly brilliant, but what professors serve as is an important resource to go to when you want to seek counsel, when you want to seek advice, when you want to know what it means to study a particular discipline in its full glory. We think all of those benefits are lost when you have to resort to using, I don't know, a chat message on a screen to check with the professor on how he's doing. No, thank you, if you were asking me a POI. I'm so used to these guys harassing me. Third, we think that it's going to lead to the death of certain disciplines, and this was completely diminished by the government, right? We don't think that the academy should purely be dominated by disciplines with immediate practical applications, as these guys admitted. We don't want the computer sciences to be the sole education, I'll take you in a second, that Cornell provides. I know that Alex told me this morning that he wants to take a course on being a fishwife. We don't think that a MOOC would be able to provide that to him. Go.
Literally hundreds of thousands of people who wouldn't get the chance to go to a brick-and-mortar institution like Harvard got the opportunity to learn basic moral principles from Michael Sandel's lecture on justice. Why is that a bad thing?
Are you kidding me? Are you suggesting these people didn't have basic moral principles before they decided to sign up for Justice X? I doubt that. And secondly, if we don't have enough brick-and-mortar institutions, I'm happy to sign a petition to your senator to build more of those. So let's also talk about why this is bad, because it creates inequality in the academy. We reject the idea of this phenomenon of the star professor. We think it's bad for education. We think it's pretty bad, for instance, that Sam's ego is going to get even more inflated now that he's going to be able to pull in hundreds of thousands of students to his MOOC, while someone else who offers a less glamorous course will not be able to do so. No, thank you. We think it'll make it harder for faculty senates to come together and agree upon important issues if all of them have separate sources of income that have nothing to do with each other. We also think it leads to a lot of bad inequity among schools, right? We think it's pretty bad that elite schools will be the only schools that are being taught by people and the rest are being taught by computers. It actually creates for a pretty scary looking society if you think about it. The 1% being taught by people and the 99% by screens. It's quite terrifying. And I just want to make clear that the San Jose philosophy department did not lose out to video lectures. They simply weren't given a chance to compete with them because the diktat was, you guys are out and the MOOCs are in. So let's last talk about the finance boogie, right? We think that these MOOCs are going to be unable to provide any meaningful sort of money. The average size of an NIH grant, for instance, is $497,000 in 2012. A MOOC doesn't come close. And as far as funding Reddy's debate expenditure is concerned, I'm less concerned given all the other harms that we've spoken about. But this is really the problematic dichotomy that government has to deal with. They need to choose between expanding the knowledge that Cornell has to other people and making money. They cannot have both, and they've claimed to have both. Either government can say that they want to spread the knowledge that Cornell has to people who cannot afford brick-and-mortar institutions, great, but then you earn no money because the moment you begin charging for these courses, not everyone gets that knowledge. So decide if you want to spread knowledge, or decide if you want to make money, and maybe then we can have a more interesting debate. Finally, I want to remind everyone that this is an important decision that shouldn't be made just because Harvard and MIT do it. That typically has been a bad rationale for doing things. To conclude quickly, I want to remind everyone that they're bad for education at Cornell. They're probably really bad for people who have to suffer these MOOCs in other universities, and they don't bring us much money. We're very proud to oppose.
For the debaters from the audience. Does anybody have questions? Raise your hand, someone will come to you with a microphone.
I'm afraid I think that the opponents have a very elitist point of view. Not everything happens here at Cornell University. San Jose has some excellent courses, but it cannot fulfill the need of all Californians or the world. MOOCs have a high attrition rate, but when Stanford attracts 220,000 students to one computer intelligence MOOC, 25,000 finish the course. That's what you have to look at. The others are gaining it, and many of the people who engage in MOOCs already have higher education. They're just trying to continue their education in ways that they cannot travel to Ithaca, New York, or Cambridge, Massachusetts, and they have to get it to know the needs.
Why have none of the debaters recognized the middle ground where there's some MOOCs mixed with some in-person instruction? It's hard to imagine in pure form either of the scenarios you sketch.
You guys can respond.
Sure. So I'll answer both the questions, I guess. So the first one is about Stanford and the fact that many people are able to access some form of education that they otherwise wouldn't be able to. I think that's a fair point. I think that MOOCs actually do have some value in that they can spread knowledge to other countries, other places in America that may not be as well here as mobile. The harm that we think they do sort of create is the fact, as we illustrated repeatedly during our speeches, is that universities may make the decision of choosing MOOCs to entirely eliminate certain departments. This also somewhat responds to the second question. This is why the middle ground is so hard to achieve, because they're so seductive in their ease that universities may choose them instead of making the harder decisions.
I think the reason why you won't have a complete domination of the MOOCs is because some of us actually want the in-person experience. And insofar as we want to go to a place like Harvard or Cornell and be taught by a professor and have the wonderful sort of in-class experiences of meeting people of all different backgrounds, the universities will still offer that sort of thing. It's just a matter of whether they want to do this in addition. It's simply not true that there's this sort of one-to-one trade-off. Additionally, just because you make sort of the cost of education cheaper by having a cheaper platform like MOOCs, it doesn't mean it can't be profitable for the university, because by bringing down the cost of education, by no longer requiring sort of the large departments that might be necessary otherwise to sort of provide, sort of spread this information, you end up with a circumstance in which more people are able to access it. In turn, you could actually be able to make more money. I mean, the fact that computers might be cheaper now than they were a few decades ago doesn't mean there isn't a lot of money in the computer market, more than there used to be, because now more people can access the computer than they could 20 years ago. We think it's the same sort of thing here.
What data is there to indicate there's actually an attrition of faculties in lesser institutions using MOOCs as a primary source of education?
I'm sorry, I don't think we heard that question.
Oh, what data is there to indicate there's an attrition of faculty in non-MOOC generated universities like Cornell or Harvard and Podunk University? Is there any data that suggests that there's attrition of faculty in those schools?
Just to clarify, your question is about attrition of faculty?
Yes.
Okay, sure. Unfortunately, there isn't much data available, with the exception of the San Jose State University example, simply because MOOCs haven't entirely replaced departments yet. But we do think that the San Jose State University example is quite telling, because they chose to make a financial investment
in other fields and chose to go to the philosophy department because, as Kirat says, MOOCs are so seductive, that they're so easy, that they might be able to replace the departments. I think that it's quite possibly an analogy that might be applied in other schools, especially schools that are equally strapped for cash and might have to choose between privileging certain departments in person and certain departments online.
So I'd like to pose a question, and do we have to view MOOCs as being such a radical departure from the existing university system? If we look at the MOOC as, in effect, replacing the lecture. When I came to Cornell, I had Clinton Rossett and Sienko playing, they were up there on the stage, and I was one of 2,000 in Bailey Hall. So I had a chance to hear from them, to experience them, but then in the recitation class, have the personal dialogue and interaction. So do we need to view MOOCs as being such a radical departure from what hundreds of years of history of lecture and recitation classes have been at Cornell and elsewhere?
Thank you. So we do think that MOOCs can be done better than in their most completely extreme form. So if, for instance, a MOOC was structured with the lecture, as you said, being videotaped, but then being followed by sort of extensive interaction between students and professors, we'd have less of a problem with it. Unfortunately, given that the evidence that is indeed the widespread way of doing things is currently sparse, that's what sparks our reservation about it. So if that was the dominant way of using MOOCs, we'd have less of a problem with it.
Yeah. Could I also add to that really quickly? So MOOCs are replacements for the traditional lecture mode of teaching in places like Cornell. Like, I could see myself not attending a lecture and watching a MOOC instead. But for the people for whom it matters most, MOOCs are a radical departure in as far as they cannot hope to get the recitation experience because MOOCs would be the only kind of educational access that they would have. It would be radical for them, but of course it's our contention that it would be radical in a good way because at least there's the intermediate level of having some sort of lecture experience, some sort of engagement with faculty like the ones we have at Cornell.
The debate has so far focused mainly on the delivery of education by professors via screen or in person. But having taken the justice course on edX, the advantage, I soon gave up watching the videos, but I had free access to the professor's book, which I was able to read. And so, what would you say about the advantages or disadvantages of MOOCs as providing access for free to students at San Jose State and other places around the world that they would otherwise not be able to afford?
I think, thanks for that question. I think that there's certainly an advantage in having a course laid out, a course with a syllabus, a course with reading material that you might be able to access in a curated form that you might not be able to access otherwise. But I think that there's a distinction between the MOOCs that are available that I took in high school, for example, to supplement my understanding of calculus, and the MOOCs that entirely replace classes at brick-and-mortar universities. And I think that this is a distinction that makes the opposing side makes it a little bit more difficult for them to access this inequality argument, right? Because I think that yes, there is a place for MOOCs, yes, there is a place for free education, but I don't think that it should replace the interaction, the physical things that you get from having a professor, having somebody in the audience next to you who you might be able to talk about the course with. I think that those are things that shouldn't be replaced, and I think that that's really the distinction that's at the heart of this debate.
Yesterday, President Skorton restated that Cornell aspires to be one of the top 10 research universities in the world. And like it or not, we are involved in an arms race with our top competitors. So it seems to me that if MIT, Harvard, Stanford, and others who are currently ranked ahead of Cornell are actively embracing MOOCs, at least to understand what the potential is for the future, Cornell must also either invest in or even go one step better with perhaps a hyper MOOC or something like that, shape ourselves in the Cornell way.
While I obviously cannot fully appreciate the pressures of keeping up with those guys, I do think that it's true that there might be some gambles that Harvard and MIT can make that Cornell probably cannot, given just the fact that they happen to sit on larger pots of money. So this may or may not be a good gamble, but I fully understand the concern of wanting to keep up in rankings and so forth.
I think my question is more directed to the gentleman here on my left. It seems to me that MOOCs fundamentally undermine the idea of a university, which is not just about the imparting of information, but about the exchange of ideas, argument, refutation, and arriving at an essential truth. It seems to me that MOOCs are really good for training people to regurgitate information, and that those kind of courses fundamentally undermine the idea of what a university is about.
The quick answer is that to some extent they do. This is something that government unfortunately has to live with. Unfortunately, for many of the people who MOOCs affect most, they do not have access to that kind of rich university experience that the other side has talked to you about as well, right? Like, someone in San Jose State probably isn't getting a great amount of interaction with their peers when in the time that they spend outside of classes, they aren't getting the same kind of discussions that people on the trade team might be having. This is an unfortunate fact of the American education landscape, but it's something that I think that the university can make accommodations for. So to that end, MOOCs do transform that fundamental experience. Moreover, I would say that MOOCs are also trying to incorporate that sort of interactive aspect of the university. Granted, it's a lot harder to do in a world where you have, I don't know, a Coursera discussion forum or an edX discussion forum, instead of having in-person interaction where we just, it is apparent to us that it's going to be a lot more interactive and a lot richer. But attempts at replacing it are being made, and where the alternative is not having that kind of educational engagement at all, it might be an improvement even if it dilutes these fundamental and traditional aspects of the university.
Thank you for your discourse, much more informed and live than your own Congress walk provides. Two thoughts about the real world. One is that we keep going back to San Jose State. In the real world, I think that people not being displaced are highly qualified, tenured professors, often adjuncts who are poorly paid without benefits, who may not have the skill set of Harvard and Cornell professors. So that real world is maybe they're not getting the good education that we are, so there's an opportunity. And the other real world advantage of MOOCs is there is almost no possibility of a professor seducing a student.
My question is, don't you think that the MOOCs are in an early part of the development and they may change? Don't you foresee that there could be places in different parts of the world for people to gather and to discuss, which today is very difficult to do on a discussion board? That's one. And second, there are many institutions where the teachers or the professors are overburdened with teaching time, and if they integrate MOOCs into their coursework, they can free up some of their time to do some more research or to do some more thinking when currently they're so overburdened, especially in other parts of the world.
Thanks for that question. I think those are all things that would be very positive. I think that it's possible for us to imagine a future where MOOCs would be better and more suitable for learning. But I do think that would require a reimagination of what MOOCs are in the status quo, right? Today it's just record a Cornell professor, post it online, post a syllabus, post the reading. Maybe have a forum where people can discuss the questions and do some exams together. I don't think that's what a good MOOC would be in the future, and in that case it requires Cornell to reimagine teaching online in a way that it hasn't in the status quo. So the question there would be, is it worth the benefit? Is it worth using these Cornell professors, using our faculty towards a profit-driven model of teaching, or is it better to just focus on what we've done? I think that those are two pretty important questions, and I think that if it's possible to create a better model of online teaching without harming teaching at Cornell, then it's probably a good thing. But I don't think that MOOCs in the status quo would be able to access that.
So the one thing I'd add to that, or I guess say in opposition to that, is that Before Michael Sandel was teaching Justice X, he was teaching Justice at Cornell, at Harvard, the exact analog of the course. Professors are not being more burdened in as far as the same professors who give large performative lectures are now giving these large performative lectures online. That tends to be the modal way in which MOOCs are used. You're absolutely right that these are early times. And when in doubt, you have debates like this one where we speculate what sort of leading indicators would tell us which direction we should take the university. We think that the leading indicators of Harvard and MIT and even private venture capitalists who have invested tens of millions of dollars in Coursera and edX are good leading indicators, and that they point out a valuable direction which Cornell should pursue. Which is why we think that the development of MOOCs will be positive from here and perhaps the next dimension.
You partially answered my question, which was, I was thinking about a couple of days ago, I heard the example of Kodak, where they just kept milking the cash cow until it was too late, and then what happened. So is MOOCs the game changer here? Is what I'm wondering, and do we keep milking the cash cow, if you will, and continue with what we've done in the past, and will we get to a point where it's too late to change? Or should we get ahead of it and kind of figure out these issues and have Cornell be at the leading edge of trying to figure it out?
Thanks for that question. I do think that it's very important for Cornell to be at the forefront of innovation. It's something that we've always done. But if we're looking for a cash cow, it's unclear to me that MOOCs will be the solution. I think that there's a bit of a dichotomy here, right? That either we increase access and it decreases inequality because it's very cheap, or it's the same form of education that's equally as inaccessible, equally as profitable, and just more time. I'm uncertain that necessarily increasing access at a lower cost would lead to a sustainable future of profit for Cornell. And I don't think that necessarily entering it earlier would mean something that would help us profit in the future.
Also, if I can quickly add, I think in some senses, these last few questions highlight an interesting part of the general MOOC debate for me, which is that a lot of people are seeing MOOCs as the solution to vastly different problems. So some people think that it's the magic pill for educational access, some people think it's the magic pill for diversity, some people think it's the magic pill for money. And I think it's important to recognize that these goals sort of trade off against each other, and it's important to be absolutely clear what you want from MOOCs, and not sort of just throw everything in the mix. Yeah.
Thank you for the debate. The pro-con structure is really helpful. Let me give you a different suggestion. In imagining the future, sometimes it helps to create a construct. So let me give you two, and then just let the panel discuss it. The first is, I took an executive MBA program. It allowed me to work. It allowed me to get together with my class for a week at the beginning of the semester and at the end of the semester, and then meet only on Fridays, which allowed me to pursue other activities, including work, at the same time I studied, but it allowed the university I attended to use its facilities with multiple classes and to make better use of its facilities. Intellectual capital will be more liquid, physical capital is more fixed. So if you just imagine a construct where MOOCs impact our ability to operate this university where 30% of our facilities are no longer needed. Our facilities are located in Ithaca, New York. MITs and Harvards are located in Cambridge. Okay. Do you see a risk to this university that our physical facilities, much like banks fighting ATMs off, okay, are more at risk for us in Ithaca, New York, in terms of losing value than Harvard or MIT might face in addressing MOOCs as part of their offering?
So, just to clarify, so with the introduction of MOOCs, you're saying that physical facilities at Cornell might be more risky.
Just assume that, just make a construct. Let's say that MOOCs become 30% of our offering, which reduces our need for 30% of our physical facilities. Think about that as a risk to our university relative to an urban located university that has real estate that still has value.
Yeah, that's right, and I actually step in for just a second to defend these guys. I think there are certain physical facilities that will never lose their value no matter where they're located. I think Cornell happens to possess some incredibly specialized infrastructure. I think there's a particle accelerator on the ground somewhere. There's a very, very expensive nanotech lab that was built recently. All of these things, I think the location begins to matter less. Which is not to say that MIT may also have these facilities. But I think the real threat is that real estate will lose value when it comes to the more general infrastructure that we do possess. And I think that, again, departments that are going to be hurt by this are the ones that don't have those buildings that will always be in demand. So it will end up being English and history and romance studies that are going to suffer tremendously because their buildings are going to now be worth close to nothing.
So to follow up in a way, rather than competing with the ones where they serve buildings and gyms and climbing walls, don't you think that there's a possibility that outstanding teaching through a MOOC in fact creates competition in the marketplace where the competition isn't going to be about who has the better cafeteria, but who has the better teaching? And better teaching will be able to be manifestly distributed all over the country, perhaps a Carl Sagan lecture, or Moss, or Walter Lefebvre, that will force competition and better teaching for mediocre institutions, and better teaching will replace that if they don't rise up to the occasion. And secondly, does this create an educational model like the airlines, where you have a choice of flying tourists, you have a choice of flying first class? They both get you where you're going, you just have a choice of how you get there.
And how much you pay for bags?
It just depends on that. We try to come up here with as little baggage as possible, and leave the same amount.
So, absolutely easy answer, but more than just that, more than creating a free market for teaching, it unbinds you of having to commit to the same 4-year, like, I shall come to Ithaca, New York, and sample from the professors that are here coming model of teaching, right? It allows you, for instance, to drop out of courses. In fact, 95% of students do, and take up another course in the middle of the semester. The concept of a semester itself might become moot in the world of MOOCs. It might, for instance, allow you to take different classes each semester from Yale Open Courseware and MIT Open Courseware and Harvard's Justice X. It allows you to sample from the richest diversity of American academia, which can only be positive even for students like ourselves who already benefit from having incredible access. But it's particularly beneficial for students who can't even hope to have some access to Cornell professors or Harvard professors or MIT professors. So in that respect, you're absolutely right.
And I also want to jump in on that point. If people no longer want sort of standard four-year education, then Cornell is simply shooting itself in the foot by not updating itself to students' needs. We simply don't operate in a bubble. We can't sit down and tell ourselves, well, we want students to come here for 4 years. We don't care what they want. This is the way we want it to be, and we don't want to switch. We don't want to become more modern because we can develop our own environment. It simply doesn't work like that because you have to respond to student needs. I don't think that we're going to see a gutting of departments because I think that people still want the traditional four-year education, and I think Cornell will still be able to offer that. But if there comes a time in which MOOCs begin to take over and Cornell hasn't adjusted to that change, then our lack of planning will actually be beneficial. It will just end up hurting us anyway.
We have time for one more question.
Essentially, the mission of Cornell is to enhance the quality of life of people around the world. Any person, any study. Seems to me that some reasoned combination of MOOCs and the Cornell experience, some balanced combination of that really enhances the ability of our university to fulfill that mission.
As I said earlier, we're entirely fine with this perfect mix of computer screens, professors, and MOOCs thrown in the middle. We're entirely fine with that. Our only concerns are that the incentives seem to be set up in a way that once we open the doors, the floodgates will be open, and that's really our only concern.
I think you really touched on perhaps what the biggest point is of the pro side of the trainings. It's the idea that Cornell is a big benefit here in terms of benefiting our education, in terms of being an institution which wants to educate people who wouldn't otherwise get that particular education. We stated in an earlier question that opposition to this debate takes a rather elitist perspective. I think that's exactly right. I mean, yes, you might technically enhance education inequality, but compare that to what the status quo is right now. We really want to leave people without an education for the sake of sort of not risking the damage to our institution, which probably won't materialize at all.
Could I leave you with just one observation, rather than a question? The quality of the education through the MOOCs at the moment is still evolving as to how effective it will be. But Cornell has had now almost 14 years of online, high-quality experiences through the eCornell vehicle. And one startling statistic, because it's highly interactive with instructors, not authoring professors necessarily, is that 97% have rated those courses, highly interactive, as good as or better than their classroom experiences. Now that's a much smaller scale than anything the MOOCs are now doing, but it can be done in an extremely high quality way. We just have to find an event and be innovative enough to do better with the MOOC environment.
Thank you. Good way to end it. So the students are going to be around, milling about. Feel free to come up and talk to them. And thank you very much.